Cool. Good morning, everybody. I think a lot of people are having trouble getting here this morning. Crummy weather. This was not expected. Phil, please have a seat. I'll be introducing Phil in just a minute. So I think we'll get underway. Perhaps some folks will be arriving a little bit late, but we don't want to hold you folks up too much. So I'll start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 66th CASI Aeronautics Conference. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à la 66e conférence en aéronautique de CASI. CASI, ça veut dire Institut Aéronautique et Spatial du Canada in English, and everybody knows it as CASI, so sorry for that. My name's Jeff Longadoc. I'm the executive director, and I'm here today taking the place of Al Conrad. Phil Cole. I'm not taking your place.
You can.
Al Conrad, our president, unfortunately, the night before last, got in touch with us and said he has COVID. So he graciously offered not to attend today, and so we accepted. And last night, one of our presenters got in touch with us and said that COVID had struck there too, and so we have one fewer presentation to make as a consequence of that. The moral of this story is that COVID may be on the resurgence, and so in recognition of wanting to keep all of you safe, Todd Legault, my colleague in the registration room, and I will be wearing masks most of the time. I'm going to lose mine right now because I don't need it at the moment, but I recommend that if you are concerned about COVID, we have masks in the registration room. Please help yourself to one. And in the event that you begin to feel like you might possibly have COVID, we also have test kits, so we can let you do that. So it's a kind of a bummer of a way to start a program, but I felt that I ought to do that in recognition of everybody's concern about their own safety and that of the people with whom they have to deal. So that is the COVID part. Now, first of all, could I ask everybody please to remember to turn your phones off or down enough so that they're not going to ring and bother everybody. In doing so, that would go for the whole conferences, so in the afternoon and the breakouts as well as in the plenary sessions. Emergency exits is an important thing always. You can see the exit signs above the doors here, and they really are exits. So in the event that the fire alarm goes off or some other panic develops, those are the exit doors, and you can exit that way, that way. It's easy to get out of this facility. All right, I want to tell you about food and beverage a little bit. We have breakfasts every day. I'm not sure that that message was conveyed satisfactorily as regards this morning because there's a lot of breakfast that still hasn't been consumed, and so hopefully we can get more of that eaten. Tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday, breakfast also will be served, so I encourage you to get here a little bit early and take advantage of that. Lunches will be served every day. All 3 days they won't be plated. They'll be buffet style. They'll be served out here, and you can come in here and be comfortable and have your lunch. Tomorrow night we have a gala dinner. There will be we call them senior awards. These are awards of distinction, 3 of them that will be presented tomorrow evening. For those of you who haven't decided to attend that event, I would encourage you to do so. Regular registrations include that. So it's a gala affair, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of our colleagues. Um, so, so that's the food and beverage part. And we have coffee before every day begins. Well, with breakfast, we have coffee halfway through the morning and coffee halfway through the afternoon as a formal break. But you will be able to find palatable coffee outside the door all day long. And that, I think, will be a welcome opportunity to get out there and have a coffee whenever you want. Allergy concerns or vegetarian wish for the dinner tomorrow night, please let Todd know. We will, and also when you get into your dinner tomorrow evening, let your server know. We'll be giving you a card that will indicate that you have an allergy concern or you would like a vegetarian meal. And so those you need to talk to Todd about, and he'll explain what the protocol will be, and that'll help make sure there's no misunderstandings at dinner time tomorrow. Yes. This afternoon, well, actually, for each of our plenaries, including the one starting after coffee this morning, we will have folks giving presentations. So those of you who are speakers, please give your PowerPoint, or presumably it'll be a PowerPoint presentation, to the folks in the corner over there. And they will make sure that your presentation is loaded in the system so that you can know how to access it when the time comes. Also, we have a linear mic that I'm wearing right now. You may prefer a handheld mic, it's up to you. But either option is available for you, but just make sure that you're mic'd in some way prior to you taking the stage. Today's technical program, there has been one cancellation that I mentioned earlier. Otherwise, I don't think there are any further changes, but you can get the absolute up-to-date program with, what's the name of that?
QR code.
What's that?
Scan the QR code.
Yeah, scan the QR, thank you, Phil.
Yep.
Scan the QR code, and that'll give you the most up-to-date version of the program. The written, or the printed copy that we had to send to press several days ago has a couple of inaccuracies in it. One of them pointed out this morning, which is at what time does the afternoon session begin? The answer to that is 1:45, and it'll go through until 3:15. The program gives you an option with 1:30 to 3 o'clock. We don't have to do it that way. We'll do it from 1:45 to 3:15. Welcome reception tonight. It begins around 5:30, and it'll last about an hour and a half. There'll be lots of food, and there'll be a bar available as well. So we hope that everybody will take advantage of that. It's a good networking opportunity and a way to make new friends and influence people too, if you want to do. Let's see. I think that's about it. I could go on, but I won't. There's always lots of detail about a conference. If you have any questions or any concerns about anything, you can always walk down the hall to our registration room, where Todd Legault will be there all the time, and I'll be there some of the time. Any particular interest you have or changes or anything like that, you can come on down there, and I hope we can answer your questions for you. So, thank you for your patience. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Phil Cole. If you look in your printed program, you're going to see a brief bio of Phil and a photo that looks very much like he does right now.
A few years ago.
I'll just say that, or to introduce Phil, his topic is INSAT, which is a new federal government program with a 7-year, $350 million budget. This program focuses on 4 key areas, keynote areas: hybrid alternative propulsion, aircraft architecture and system integration, transition to alternate fuels, and aircraft support infrastructure and operations. So these are the 4 key areas that this INSAT program addresses and wants to encourage Canadian industry to get involved with. The money is there to support that, And Phil is here to tell us more about it, and hopefully to give some idea about how, if your organization is interested in getting involved, how you might go about that. So Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it. There we are. So first and foremost, good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased and privileged to have the opportunity to talk to you this morning. Before you all start panicking, it's not a normal keynote address. I'm literally going to explain the background of the INSAT program to hopefully get you guys motivated and excited for what lies ahead, because the program has an enormous impact on the community that I'm sitting here looking at this morning, the researchers in the aerospace sector in Canada. And also because the program, as its federal funding, has some key KPIs that we need to return back to the industry on behalf of the federal government, which include dissemination. And so it's very apt that we're here at the CASI AERO event here, because it really does provide us one of the key technical opportunities on an annual basis to brief back the industry on some of the progress that the research programs will be making going forward. So I think, I hope, this is the first of at least 7 to 10 years of collaboration with CASI as a result of the INSAT program. So first of all, what is INSAT? It's I hate acronyms, and I fought very hard to not have an acronym. I wanted some emotional word like Gaia or something that everyone would get. It's about the planet and eco-responsibility. But I got overruled because we're aerospace, and aerospace loves acronyms. So INSAT is, INTAD in French. It's the Initiative for Sustainable Aviation Technology of Canada. So that's what INSAT is. Where does it come from? It took us 3.5 years. For those of you who are used to dealing with the federal government, that's actually a remarkably short period of time. But for those of you who are in industry, it's a very long period of time. The genesis is we were going through the pandemic. One of the first things that we saw in industry that stopped when the pandemic started was discretionary funding on research. And so this was an attempt by the industry on behalf of the whole industry to kickstart funding again on research and development in aerospace. The intention was not for the pandemic to have finished before we were able to launch it, but that's kind of what happened. So it's taken us a long time to get there, but it was initiated by Pratt & Whitney Canada. And they got together a group of like-minded industry individuals. There were 6 Canadian aerospace companies that were involved in getting together to put the program together with the federal government. And it resulted in, at the Paris Air Show this year, in an announcement by Minister Champagne of $350 million of federal government funding for a program that would last a minimum of 7 years. And if you look at the fact that 40% contribution from the federal government, that $350 million represents 40% of what will be about an $850 million research program over 7 years. So it's very, very exciting. And what's even more exciting is that finally last week on Wednesday, the contribution agreement between INSAT as an organization and the federal government was actually signed. So we're now at the position where we can actually start this out briefing, and I think this is the first big briefing that we've done on the program. So kudos to CASI for being there first. So what is the opportunity? We've all recognized the dilemma that we're in from an environmental perspective, and the aerospace industry, like many others, has signed up to net carbon neutrality by 2050. And why is that important when aerospace represents only maybe 2 to 3% of the total emissions globally? And it's because air travel is always growing. So more and more air travel every year. So that percentage overall is going to increase and could get as high as 10% if we don't do something about it. So we decided that we needed to focus R&D efforts on any technologies, any services, any processes that would help the industry as a whole drive towards being more carbon neutral over time. And that's what this opportunity is all about. It's remarkable. I was at the IASC conference here in Ottawa last week, and just the buzz about this INSAT program seems to have changed the attitude of many companies in the Canadian aerospace sector, who traditionally maybe are a little bit protective of some of the things that they're working on, especially things that are out there maybe 5, 10, 15 years in the future. That attitude shift is already starting to appear. And the industry seems to recognize that there's too much to do right now for any individual companies to go it alone. And so this is a collaborative effort required by the industry as a whole. And that's starting to materialize at conferences and trade shows visibly. So that's really exciting, really encouraging, and it gives me a huge amount of optimism. There's the word that I was thinking of. So, what is INSAT? It exists as an industry group funded by the federal government, or partially funded by the federal government, to look at projects proposed by industry and academia in Canada, and for that industry group to make recommendations of which projects get funded. So the recourse back to the federal government for approval is still there, but effectively they are going to let industry and the selection committee that's part of INSAT make the decision on where the funding goes. That's really important. If you look at the SIF 5 stream, the Strategic Innovation Fund Stream 5, their companies apply to the government directly, and you're involved in negotiating with the government on which projects get funded. This is effectively a lump of SIF 5 money provided to industry to make those decisions themselves. So the government is recognizing that in the absence of an aerospace strategy, industry might actually be best positioned to determine what industry needs in order to achieve net carbon neutrality, rather than folks in the government directly. So this is a real change in attitude. So INSAT is going to be looking at green aviation technology projects, matching the government funding to the industry funding that comes along with those projects, providing access to flight demonstrator platforms. This is really, really important. Most of the projects that we'll be talking about will need to be demonstrated in some way, shape, or form. So this is not low TRL stuff. We'll actually be wanting to measure the results of some of these technologies and determine actually what is the carbon impact of these technologies going forward. And in order to do that, we need to have a suite of demonstration and evaluation platforms that we can do that testing on. So the network will have those in it, and some of the projects that are funded by the network will be creating the platforms of the future. Some will be from NRC, some will be from industrials, some may be resident in university sites, but basically a collection that is then open to everybody. Now, the big problem that we've got as a group is that we have committed to a minimum number of projects over the 7 years. And it's a lot of projects. We're in the multiple hundreds of projects that we have to kickstart between now and 7 years. And if the average project lasts 3 years, we've only really got 4 years in order to get those several hundred projects kickstarted. So we're going to be blitzing the industry and publicizing this going forward. It won't be a regular call for proposals that's issued. We've learned that that is a counterproductive process. You get a call for proposals, you submit a proposal, it gets rejected, proposal gets dropped on the floor, and all that money that you've invested in the proposal is wasted. Not so there. Projects won't get refused. They'll get returned with comments, and you'll have the opportunity to continually resubmit projects. So you shouldn't be shy to submit projects. And also, there'll only be one call for proposals at the beginning. You can submit proposals whenever you like. And the project selection committee will meet 4 times a year, once every quarter, and they'll review projects put in front of them that have been submitted up until that point, and then they'll review the next batch when they come. So a much easier program, we think, to access, because we recognize that it takes a lot to submit a proposal, and if you're submitting it knowing maybe you've got a 30% chance of success, some people may be put off from submitting proposals. So we absolutely don't want that to be the case. So Jeff already dealt with this slide, but there are 4 pillars in INSAT of the kind of technologies we're looking for. First pillar being hybrid alternate propulsion. Second one being novel aircraft architectures and systems, all of which are aimed at reducing carbon emissions. Then obviously we've got the new fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, whatever else anybody can imagine between now and whenever, as a type of energy source that might be being used. And then infrastructure and operations technologies. So this might be navigation, it might be to do with optimization around the taximat at airfields to help reduce carbon emissions. But it's also things like investing in infrastructure that can then be leveraged by the industry in terms of testing, in terms of equipment that projects might need going forward. So, along with those pillars, the intention is to develop capabilities. Obviously, INSAT is going to be providing investment and support. So INSAT not only will be taking proposals, there'll be a permanent staff at INSAT that is there to help people who want to submit a proposal get the proposal done right. So there for asking advice, if you have questions about the proposal and what needs to be in the proposal, there will actually be a team of people there to help you with that. We want to make this easy because we know we've got a challenge to get enough proposals in. Obviously, it's about fostering collaboration. It's also about developing people and skills. You know, as an industry, we've recognized for quite some time that this is a major shortfall that we've all got. And we've also realized that every company in Canada that's looking for people is trying to hire exactly the same people. So we're actually competing with each other, which is good for the potential employees, but not so good for the industry as a whole. So we need to get more people coming through the system that are interested in aerospace. So part of this is about making aerospace sexy again, making it appealing to young folks so that they are looking more at aerospace as a potential future career. And obviously, it's about development of intellectual property and keeping it in Canada. That's a requirement. The IP has to be owned and stay in Canada if it's got any of this funding. It can be exploited abroad, but it needs to be owned and stay in Canada. So the government realizes that intellectual property is key to the success for the industry members. So this is a map that over time here, we hope will have a lot more words on it. So we won't be able to present it anymore because no one will be able to read it. But lots of capabilities distributed right across the country so that we then as an industry know where we need to go for certain things. Now, as a result of the announcement at the Le Bourget Air Show, there's a couple of other activities that have been going on around the globe, notably the Sustainable Aviation Task Force that was kicked off in June of this year here in Canada. INSAT will be liaising directly with the Sustainable Aviation Task Force going forward. So the intention here is that actions that come out of the task force, we would be looking for funding opportunities in INSAT as well. And then I was quite surprised, as you can tell, I speak with a funny accent. King Charles learned about what was happening in Canada. As a result, he has directed the University of Cambridge in the UK to connect the Aviation Impact Accelerator, which is a UK research group, with INSAT directly. So it's starting to gain a little bit of international visibility too. So what kind of activities is INSAT involved with? Two things, really. Technology projects, for one. So development of technologies, access to the demonstrator platforms that I talked about already. Environmental assessment. It's often easy to predict what you might be doing in terms of emissions, but a bit more difficult to measure it. The folks at NRC know this very well. Measuring the impact of what you do is essential to moving the industry forward. And just as importantly, the stuff that we do must have a route to commercial applicability and potential. Government's not looking to invest in pure science for the sake of pure science. It wants to make sure that the science that it is investing in, the research that it is investing in, is doing something for the industry as a whole. It's moving the rock up the hill. Obviously, there's pure science that's involved in getting us to some of those things, but the objective overall is not about that. It's about a route to commercialization eventually. Doesn't have to be the outcome of the individual project, but it's the individual project's got to result in something that then someone might want to take forward and commercialize. But the activities are also about developing the ecosystem itself. So think of this as an ecosystem rather than just a bucket of money. We've got to have regional offices for INSAT right across the country. It's got to involve OEMs, tier ones, tier twos, SMEs, startups, research organizations, universities, colleges, right across the country. And so we have to build that ecosystem, and one of the mandates that we've got is that we don't do that from scratch, but we leverage other ecosystems or other organizations that are already in place. Unsurprisingly, the government doesn't want to spend its money reinventing the wheel. So we're required to leverage the existing RDA infrastructure, to regional organizations that are out there, organizations like CASI, Aero Montreal, Ontario Aerospace Council, those kind of things, to get in connection with their networks so that we can use them and help them at the same time. Skills development, as we mentioned before, and really importantly, and you'll see why in a minute, the outreach to small enterprises is really key. And then the government is also funding the administration and operations of INSAT. So that's very unusual. And this is potentially very useful to CASI and other organizations. There will be permanent paid staff looking after INSAT that can be leveraged to help support other organizations as well. So I think that's a good thing all around. So what are the project parameters? Project parameters, everybody has to become a member of INSAT. Don't all groan. We'll get to the price, what membership costs in a minute. It's good news, I think. And there are project criteria that every project must cover. Got to demonstrate an impact towards net zero emissions in aviation. The project itself doesn't have to result in lowering emissions, but the project itself has to demonstrate how it will help overall lower emissions. So if you can imagine, if you're developing test equipment, your test equipment in and of itself is not going to lower emissions, but if that test equipment is essential to other projects to test and show what their emissions are, then it becomes an essential part in lowering emissions overall, if that makes sense. You must demonstrate that there is a feasible path to commercialization, even if that's 10 years downstream. Bear in mind, we've got a 2050 window here, so we're going to need to be showing commercialization 2030, 2040 at the very latest in order for it to make sense. As a rule, it covers TRL range from 3 to 7, but the government has agreed that under exceptional circumstances they will go down as low as TRL2 if necessary. And each project in and of itself must result in a minimum of 1 TRL progression. Okay, so that's not so bad. We got to raise 1 TRL level. And here's why I said that outreach to small businesses is really important. Every project must involve at least one SME. It can involve 2 SMEs. It can be a project of 2 SMEs only, or it can be a project of a university and 2 SMEs, but it must at least have 1 SME. So this is not a program for large companies on their own to get funding. That's important. Okay, so let's talk about the contribution parameters. The maximum project contribution from the federal government on each project is $10 million. That's at 40% level. So that means each project actually could be up to $22 million, but $20 million is where it's capped. So project proposals of $20 million or lower, there is no minimum. You can submit a proposal for $100,000 if you want to. I'm not sure you would want to, because the application process would probably spend that $100,000. But there's no minimum limit. The funding is 40% as a rule, could be as much as 50% in exceptional cases if it's a particularly important project for industry. And academia is up to 100% on a project level. So it's good funding opportunity for universities. It's a standard overhead calculation for companies here. It's up to 55%, which is the normal federal rules. You can stack funding up to 75%. Some provinces have a lower stacking limit. Quebec, for instance, is 70% for a lot of its funding. So you'd be governed by whatever the worst case stacking limit is, but you can stack. And at least 90% of the expenses must be incurred in Canada. So there's room for 10% for things that you have to buy or get done outside of Canada, but most of the money will be spent here in Canada. And then there is a small membership fee for INSAT, we'll talk about in a minute, and an administration fee that is levied on each approved project. It's also quite small, but it will be taken from the funding as you get the funding. So you don't have to pay that until your project is approved and it comes automatically out. So what are the selection criteria? Ability to deliver and implement the project is key. You know, do you have the right applicants in the program? Do you have the right governance structure in place? Technical content obviously is very important. Do you have the right work breakdown structure? Is it organized properly? You've got the right milestones, the right go, no-go milestones in the schedule. And you must have an IP strategy at the beginning. It's not something that you can add at the end. You have to declare what's happening to the IP when you apply for the project. That's tough in a lot of cases, but it's a requirement on this project. And then, obviously, projects have to align, broadly speaking, with what the INSAT's raison d'etre is, which is net zero target, and benefits to Canada and Canadian business. And what are we responsible for in INSAT? We're responsible for ensuring that projects that are eligible demonstrate net zero and other benefits. So this is a contract between INSAT and the federal government, and INSAT is responsible for all reporting to the federal government on all projects. So project would sign an agreement with INSAT. INSAT has the agreement with the government. The individual project does not have to report to the government directly. It's all through INSAT. So that's a relief to a lot of people. But it means that INSAT has signed up to meeting all the KPIs that the government is after. And so INSAT is going to be pushing very hard on projects for individual projects to meet KPIs. As I said before, the INSAT is responsible for doing basic due diligence on programs in terms of the capacity of companies to fund their portion of the projects, those kinds of things, and to assist the project teams in developing proposals and ensure that the eligible costs that have been defined are reasonable. Now, very important point here. There'll be a board of directors coming from industry, academia, NRC, a whole bunch of folks, and the government that will be set up. But the project selection committee is wholly and utterly independent from the board of directors. The project selection committee look at the projects, they make their recommendations, and the board basically rubber stamps what comes out of the project selection committee. So the board members do not influence what projects get selected. That's very important. So there's the process. I won't go into it in detail because I think I'm running a little short of time here. The process is meant to be pretty rapid. So depending on when you submit your proposal, if it goes in front of if you submit it just prior to a scheduled, and we'll publish a schedule, project selection committee, we should be able to get you an approval or otherwise within 5 to 6 weeks. So we're not waiting months here. It's meant to be pretty rapid turn. And then once your project's approved, then you would negotiate a project agreement with INSAT. It'll be a template agreement. You won't have too much choice. There's always a bit of negotiation, but template agreement, get that underway as quickly as possible. So the governance and management structure, there will be a board of directors that will be elected. At present, there's an interim board of directors that's made up of the 6 companies that were part of putting the proposal together. But we are stepping away as soon as the board of directors is elected. Probably we're talking about Q1 of next year for that to happen. We're in the process of hiring a director general right now. We're doing interviews right now, so probably be able to announce the appointment of a full-time director general by the end of November. We also have received proposals for the day-to-day operational management of INSAT. We won't be doing that ourselves. That will be subcontracted out. We've received proposals, and again, we should be announcing that before the end of November as well. So a lot of work going on, a lot of activities. The board of directors will have a chairman, and it will have a number of committees that are already defined in terms of what is required from the federal government. So finance, strategy, business development, HR and governance, IP legal. And those will go through they will be full-time employed positions, paid for out of INSAT. Okay, so founding members, CAE, Bell Helicopter, Pratt & Whitney Canada, de Havilland Canada, Bombardier and Cert Centre Canada. We are only involved until we don't need to be involved anymore. Believe me, this is not, none of us are on there because this is our actual job, it's not. So we're as anxious to get it out and up and running as quickly as possible. And we have no influence at all on what projects are approved or not approved. It's very, very important to us. We also have no special privileges having been founding members. So that's been very, very clear from the outset. It was a requirement from the federal government. We get nothing as a result of being founding members. Okay, I'll let you digest the zeros. Hopefully this is an equitable membership fee structure. $250 at the very lowest level, $250 across the board for universities, colleges and research centres, up to maximum of $5,000 for larger companies over 1,000 employees. So yeah, hopefully it won't break the bank of anybody. Luckily, this is the last slide. So we expect to be up and running right at the end of this year, and accessible to the entire Canadian ecosystem probably in January, would be my guess right now. We are going to need projects. Don't wait for the project call to come out after the new year, or maybe just before the Christmas break. Start thinking about it now. Start thinking about who you might want to partner with, especially if you're a small business. If you're a large company, you need an SME. So which SME or SMEs are you going to work with? Start looking for them now. I'm sure all of you guys have got great ideas, but you have to be a team. So start forming the team. Start coming up with the straw men, if you like, of what you want to put forward as a project. Because the sooner you apply, the sooner you get in front of the project selection committee, and the sooner you can have money. The recruiting process for INSAT is underway too, so if any of you are particularly bored with what you're doing on a daily basis and you'd like to try something different, INSAT is recruiting for a number of positions. The website is up and running, LinkedIn is up and running, and if you have any questions, you can send an email to info@insat.aero. I'll be here for the next couple of days, so if any of you want to grab me and ask difficult questions. I'm happy to not be able to answer any. No, I'm happy to try and answer whatever questions you have. On that subject, Jeff, I think, are we out of time completely, or do you want to open it up? I think we're pretty much
No, we're not out of time.
All right. Anyone got any questions? I'm happy to try and answer them.
So as Phil mentioned, he'll be here for the next couple of days. So that's a good thing for anybody who would like to find out a little more detail or to press Phil on anything he said. We have a mic right there. And we have a few more minutes for questions. So we started a little bit late, so it's 9:58 right now. We've got until 10:30 when the next panel begins. I would just ask the panelists for that panel to please make sure you've delivered your presentations to the gentleman in the corner over here, and that while we have our break for coffee, you get mic'd up. So having said that, Malcolm, would you like to make a question?
Yeah, is this on?
Yep.
All right. Great presentation, Phil. Thanks. That's very exciting. A couple of questions that occurred to me is on the projects, if companies or applicants for project support are anticipating, significant capital purchases, is that anticipated as to be part of you're talking about demonstrator platforms. Some people are going to need to invest some capital.
Sure.
Is there any exclusion on that?
There's not an exclusion on it. I wouldn't say it's encouraged hugely. Test equipment, certainly. If you can make an argument that your airplane, and you should be able to, I hope you can, if you can make an argument that the aircraft that you need, the test platform that you need is essential test equipment, it should be covered.
So, in connection with that, of course, NRC operates a number of facilities which are available to industry to use, and so funding to access those would probably be part of what can be justified in this. They're a related, slightly different question. There's a number of companies out there who have got existing projects underway, which they've taken to some stage, and they may want to carry on with them. Presumably those would be eligible for support.
Absolutely, yes. As long as what you're proposing raises another TRL level, and as long as it meets the project criteria, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Darth.
Hey, Phil.
Hey.
Great presentation. Super exciting, indeed. Interesting about the IP angle. Sort of curious how the team plans to sort of ring fence that IP and maintain it in Canada. Super challenging problem.
Oh, it's a huge problem. Probably the thing that we spent the most of 3.5 years getting to the contract. So you have to have a very clear definition on each of the projects, what background IP there is, first of all. Background IP is background IP. The concept under CIF is that anything that the federal government has contributed towards is considered a network asset. So effectively, the IP is considered a network asset that must stay owned in Canada. Like I said, it doesn't matter. You can still exploit it abroad, and you can certainly exploit it in Canada. What they care about is who owns the IP, so you can license it outside of Canada. And industry had a huge problem coming to terms with this, especially companies that do a lot of R&D. But it's that licensing piece that enabled us to come to terms with it finally. Because as you can imagine, a lot of the companies also have divisions or companies themselves abroad. The program is not intended to restrict any company's or any project's ability to make money. The government does provide us a recourse on a project-by-project basis if the IP does need to be exported for whatever reason, like permanently exported, the ownership transfer out. The minister reserves the right to say yes or no. So as a matter of course, these are the rules that apply, the IP stays here. If there's an absolute reason and you can make a good justification for it, providing the minister signs off on it at the end, you can export it. They might ask, we don't know, there's no jurisprudence on this right now, but they might ask to repay some of the contribution in those circumstances. So it effectively might impact some license fee that you would need to charge to export the IP. We don't know is the answer. But that's the one question I wasn't looking forward to, so thanks, Duff. Anybody else?
All
Yeah.
right, I've got a question.
Yeah, go for it, Jeff.
Just waiting for anybody else to get to the mic. You mentioned, I think that around about the end of the year is when things will be getting underway, but you were encouraging organizations to begin to put together their applications sooner. When might actually they begin to be assessed by the committee?
So the next project assessment committee, project selection committee, we're expecting to be end of March, beginning of April. So there's a 3-4 month window, take out the usual 3 months for Christmas. It's like now. But if you want to get in for that assessment committee, then you probably should be thinking about it at least now and building a team. And the folks that are involved in INSAT right now, we're there. You can contact any of us. You can go through the website, send an email to info@insat.aero if you want some guidance and help, on what might make a good team. Or even if you don't know who you should partner with, there's no reason that you couldn't reach out to us and say, do you know of a large company that does this, or an SME that does that, or a research center that's focused on that? It's a community. It has to be a community. So we're here to help however we can.
So for the March review process, you would want to have your submission by the end of February where it belongs, right? So that's not long from now.
No. So typically the cutoffs, there's an initial review of the proposal, right, just to make sure that it meets the requirements of the proposal. That typically takes a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. So if we announce, let's say it's March the 30th, you probably got until the middle of March to submit a proposal for that. But man, for those of us who write proposals, that comes around quick.
Okay, another question. What about our space sector colleagues?
Yes.
Is there going to be any funding and any interest in the program getting the space sector involved?
100%. Space is included in aerospace for us. So as long as you're still meeting the objectives and it's about emission reduction, absolutely.
That's very good news. I think there's a lot of interest in the space sector about those characteristics.
There's one other thing I should perhaps mention. So some of you may have heard of the AISC's Gateway proposal. So there was a government initiative. They asked AISC to go out there and through talking to all of its members, work out how to create a network of networks effectively. What's transpired is that INSAT is going to be the genesis of that network of networks going forward. So government has been very careful, and I think wisely, to say we don't want to pay for multiple governance structures, boards of directors, employees, not-for-profits. We want to create one that has the ability to expand to include other subject areas. And what that will allow us to do, let's for instance let's say that there's a need to put something specifically addressing sustainable aviation fuel. Let's take that as or advanced air mobility specifically. And a group of companies gets together, or a group of organizations gets together and comes with a proposal to either directly to Strategic Innovation Fund, to ISED, or to INSAT or to AIAC, and says, look, we want to put this together, this is what we're aiming at. We would have the opportunity of going back to the federal government for yet more money, because this is part of the $2 billion. This is only $350 million. There's other money that can be added to the pot that would end up being managed under the same umbrella. The umbrella would grow, but the government is anxious to not open Pandora's box all in one go. They want to do a bit and then gradually expand it. So there's more money.
And an encouragement, I guess, for the aero part of the aerospace sector to think about space sector organizations where you can actually overlap your areas of capability and expertise. So
yeah, if you think, propulsion is going to be one of the big areas.
Sure.
Well, you need to launch space vehicles too, so propulsion's a good place.
Pretty.
I'm short. Maybe I missed this in the slides, but I was wondering who can be the PI? Is it like an academic can be a PI? SME can be a PI? Is it open or is it specifically industry-led or something like this?
Because there's anybody can lead the proposal activity, but the contract is going to require some legal teeth to it. So the intention is that the lead applicant on a project-by-project basis is almost certainly going to be an industry partner, just so that the sword of Damocles can be waved above their head. I don't think there's a specific requirement for it not to be an academic. Certainly research organizations like NRC, they're large enough and wouldn't be a problem if they wanted to lead. But it is intended to be industry to industry, but to bring in the academic and research communities as well.
Okay, and the funding flow to the partners, is it to the main PI and then distributed out?
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Not like flowing from
No, it doesn't go to all of the parties at the same time. It's in the government parlance, they make a distinction between lead applicant and partners. So it's always, the funding flow is always through lead applicant.
Okay. So it could flow through NRC and or it's...
If NRC is a lead applicant, yes, it could.
Okay, all right. And then my last point was just maybe a suggestion. You had great slides, so thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. But I was wondering if the slides could be shared through the CASI website.
100%.
For instance, if they're posted, it could really help in the community being able to understand the program, come with other questions, and so on and so forth.
100%. Jeff's okay?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, no problem. And they're up on, you should be able to find them on the INSAT website as well, just so that you know. But yeah, absolutely, we'll share them with, there's nothing secret in them.
Thank you.
Time for one more question or a little bit more coffee time. So let's go for the coffee. A couple of announcements. Just to remind the speakers for the aviation autonomy plenary session that's coming up at 10:30. Please make sure you get your presentation over there. And session 1 will begin at 1:45 this afternoon after lunch. And Bill, thank you so much for coming this morning.
My pleasure.
I'm
Thanks for
glad
the
you can
opportunity.
spend the rest of today and tomorrow with us. Please take advantage of that, everyone who wants to do, and let's all go have some coffee. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks a lot.